We now want to hear from the practical side and focus on the work of journalists, fact-checkers, and human rights investigators. And for that, I'm extremely grateful. You can all see them here already on the screen to have with me and welcome Hazel Baker from Reuters, Sophie Nicholson from Agence France Presse, AFP, and Sam Doubley from Amnesty International. As I said, our special focus in this session will be on how technology can support journalists and human rights investigators in their daily work. And there we want to address questions such as the following. To start with, of course, how do fact checkers and verification experts work? How do they work? What challenges exist in their work? What solutions are there? What are they missing? And especially like the technology part, is technology the solution to the problem of disinformation, or maybe even the other way around? Are advances in technology providing more problems than solutions? And is it almost impossible to keep up? And of course, adding to all that, something we are very eager to hear from our speakers is a question like, what's it like to work as an investigator or journalist in these very challenging times where there's almost straight lies or so-called sometimes alternative facts, I hate that word, are making the rounds. Now, a final word about the format, and we're going to do this similar to the previous session. First, all our speakers are going to have a presentation and intervention first, and then, as we did in the previous session, you have the chance to ask any questions you may have. Please ask these questions either in the chat on Zoom on the platform or the Slido platform where you got the link at the beginning. We will monitor both, move them around, and as said, if we do not have enough time due to time constraints, of course, the speakers can answer directly in the chat. Now, moving on to our first speaker, I'm delighted to introduce Hazel Baker. She is head of UGC News Gathering at Reuters. In this role, she leads the news agency's efforts to fact check and verify newsworthy content on social media. And Hazel doesn't only work on verification like the practical work, they also at Reuters do lots of trainings, especially they've done quite impressive work on deepfake analysis and detections, so providing others with training material and know-how and knowledge. Previous to her joining Reuters, Hazel worked for Sky News, so she really has a lot of experience in the journalistic field and brings that also to our session. We are very happy to welcome her today, and thank you for bringing all this into this discussion. And Hazel, I've just seen last night the presentation already is really going to focus and zoom in onto what they do, how they work with technology, what the constraints are. And we are, of course, very eager and keen to find out more about what it's like and how you work at Reuters in this unit. So Hazel, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for joining us. We are very delighted to have you here, as we are with everybody else. Over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Jochen, for that nice introduction, and thanks everyone for joining this session, which I hope will be interesting. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing from the other panelists as well. I'm going to start by looking at the actual work that we do at Reuters. I think most of the people on this session will have heard of Reuters and have some idea about what we do as a news agency. We obviously play a rather major role in the global news ecosystem in terms of distribution of text, of pictures, of videos. But you may not be aware that we do a lot in the area of verification as well. And so if you just bear with me, I'm going to share my screen and walk through the type of work that we're doing. And I oversee two teams at Reuters, and they are linked by one word: verification. We have two sides of the same coin, the verification coin. On one hand is user-generated content, or UGC, news gathering. And that's certainly my major background at Sky and previously at Reuters. My aim was to not find disinformation, but to find real information, authentic content, mostly eyewitness media, captured by members of the public who are accidental journalists, or sometimes citizen journalists at the scene of major news events. This content is really vital to our file as an agency, despite the fact most of our visuals come from Reuters cameras. we know that there'll be many spot news events where the cameras just aren't there because we didn't know anything was going to happen. And also, even if the cameras are there, they can't capture everything. Plus, UGC also brings people really into the story. It can help people understand what it feels like to experience a story. It brings a degree of intimacy. And actually, for our digital consumers, the way it's filmed is often very, very effective for communicating a story on a smartphone. So this team, and it's about 12 dedicated journalists across the world that work in a kind of 24/7 pattern, are dedicated to looking at all breaking stories or kind of sometimes specialist investigative stories that entail user-generated content. And their primary job is to find this stuff to begin with, but then verify it, because clearly there's a huge reputational and legal risk were we to distribute content to all of our clients globally that's inaccurate. So we have a very rigorous framework for verification. We work collaboratively. We have the benefit of using all of our expertise within Reuters. We have people with actually every language you can think of, plus people who know details about local areas, about backgrounds to conflicts, about military movements, etc. And all of that information is critical when we come to assess content. And the output for that team is verified and rights cleared pictures and videos. So if we're going to distribute content around the world, we have to make sure we've got the legal rights to do so. And in order to do that, we have to reach the source. And that's actually one of the biggest challenges for us. Often we're able to verify content, but if we can't actually reach the source of that content, we have to make a decision about whether we are able to run it, distribute it globally. And very often the answer is no, because copyright is a real risk for us. And also we protect our own copyright. So we'd expect to treat others in a similar way. We also provide verification detail for our text reporters. So when we see content on social media, which is connected to news stories, it is useful for us to be able to verify that so that our text teams can refer to it in their copy. It adds color, it adds depth, and it also helps people who are used to looking on social media for stories connect our analysis with what they're seeing on Twitter or Facebook. The other side of the verification coin is the fact-checking side. And although fact-checking is a rather fundamental part of journalism, so Reuters has indeed been fact-checking for 170 years, we haven't had a kind of systematic fact-checking process of social media claims until the beginning of last year. So we set up a fact-check department at the beginning of 2020, and there were kind of two reasons for this. First of all, through the UGC news gathering process, we would find inauthentic content. We would find fake videos, we'd find things which were mislabeled. We didn't really have a good way of expressing that information to our clients or to the wider public. So it was kind of left on the cutting room floor. And we did always think about how we could use it better. Now we have an outlet for it. We can write a fact check, and we can apply that fact check to pieces of content on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, through a partnership with the Facebook third-party fact-checking program. But there's another aspect to that, and that's that misinformation is increasingly becoming a major aspect of many stories. And we knew the US election last year was likely to be one such story, and certainly didn't disappoint on that front. But there were lots of other stories where we could see more and more that misleading narratives were being absolutely incorporated, and part of the reporting needed to reflect that. So it felt like the time was right to properly set up a fact-checking team. So we have a separate team to the UGC News Gathering team. We've got about 14 of us working on this at the moment, but it's growing all the time. And their job is to look, it's kind of like living in an alternative reality. It's like news gathering, but for fake news. We have to look for misleading content, completely false narratives. You have to look at your sources, but they're not reliable sources. In fact, they're highly unreliable sources. So everything you know about journalism, you kind of tip on its head, but the process is the same. Listening to communities, building up networks of sources, having an idea about which kind of topics are likely to spark misinformation and discussion, and actively searching for content around those topics. So they are very, very linked in terms of process and skill. But the output for fact checking is a written article, and that goes on our website on reuters.com/fact-check. But we're also able to label misleading social media posts through the third-party fact-checking program. And I think there are opportunities beyond just Facebook for using this content and making sure that it's accessible to everyone. Okay, I'm going to move on to talk about technology now and how that fits into the two aspects. So on UGC News Gathering, so at the top there is an example of the kind of content I'm talking about when it comes to UGC. That's what our platform, Reuters Connect, looked like yesterday when I made the slide, rather last minute, but it has pieces of content which have all been verified by the team and rights cleared and are distributed along with reporting. You'll see there's a mixture there. Some of it is filmed by NGOs, such as the rescue of migrants at sea. Some is definitely filmed by members of the public, like passengers in the airport terminal who are stranded. What do we need to gather this content? Primarily, we need a good news sense, and we need people who are curious, and we need an intelligent approach to stories. But we do use technology, very much so. And the biggest one for us is having a decent curation platform, because we need to be able to keep track of the kind of content that we are seeing. We want to make sure we don't duplicate our efforts, because this is very time-consuming work. And it's easy for people to start looking at the same piece of video. Don't want that to happen. We also need to be able to share information that we have about single pieces of content. And we're using Truly Media at the moment, which is a curation platform which allows us to add notes at the bottom of all of the content that we're looking at, as well as walk through some of the standard processes for verification, such as geolocation. So have we decided exactly where this piece of content was filmed, and can we show that? The second most important, actually, and it's sometimes overlooked, is a file transfer app, because in many cases we are trying to get the original files from people. Now, I just want to add a caveat. We wouldn't always ask for an original file if there's any indication that the person, the source of the material, would be in danger by sending it to us. So we just bear that in mind. But to be honest, in many of the stories that we cover, such as passengers stranded at an airport terminal, that's not a concern. We need to prove authenticity of this content, and we need to prove ownership. So in these cases where we think it's safe to do so, we always ask sources to please send us the original file. I'm going to come on to that as a challenge that we face as well, but we use things like the WeTransfer app, Google Drive, Zapier, and there's a whole host of apps which allow people to send full quality files. And it's quite easy to send things via WhatsApp, and the quality is compressed, but we see far fewer scrapes, and by that I mean duplicated content, circulate in this high quality level. So it is a good indicator of authenticity, of at least ownership, if you can get hold of the original file, and we can check the metadata. Again, metadata can be altered, but we know that if we're obtaining content soon after the fact, then we have to bear in mind the likelihood of content, that metadata being altered in the time frame that we're talking about. It's all a case of building up evidence and the likelihood of things having happened to content. Other technology we use very regularly, reverse image search, which I hope is familiar to most people on this call. InVid, of course, we're here at the WeVerify session, but InVid is an absolute lifeline to many of us in this industry. It's always there. We use it every single time we encounter video, often the first stop shop. And photo forensics tools, which, again, if we've got suspicions about a particular piece of content, we might bear in mind when we look at suspicions or kind of areas of content that may possibly have been altered, although we wouldn't rely on it alone, because we know that sometimes you can get false positives, or sometimes really understanding what those tools are showing us can be tricky. Geolocation and mapping services, I mean, satellite imagery and Google Street View is, of course, extremely useful in many cases, as are marine and air traffic trackers. We've had lots of stories involving tankers. It'd be very useful to see which traffic is out there on the ocean. And then finally, social media and search engine advanced search. Clearly, there are lots of tips and tricks you can use to go deeper into search engines and social media search, and we use many of those in our daily work. Technology and fact checking. Now, it's a very similar list, really, on the fact checking front. The curation platforms are still very useful. We use CrowdTangle, which is the Facebook owned product, which allows us to assess how viral claims have gone by searching for matches. And one thing we find very useful through CrowdTangle is being able to search memes by text on the meme. So that's a piece of technology. It reads the text on the image and searches for duplicates. So that's a very useful tool that we have. We also use the Facebook third-party fact-checking product, which is a tool built by Facebook and pulls in potentially suspicious content that may warrant review by fact checkers. That uses algorithms, and it also uses a series of other signals, to which I'm not party, to determine which content goes in there. But that's clearly a tool based on technology constantly being refined, which is extremely valuable to us as fact checkers. The Wayback Machine, looking how websites have changed, if people are denied putting things on websites or trying to find previous examples. is something we use very regularly, as is the Google cache. Back to reverse image search, InVid, geolocation, and the advanced search tools are all part of fact checking. I'm going to move now to some of the challenges that we have, because I know there are some people listening here who work in the area of development, and I would definitely like to shout about the challenges that we have. And I'd like to see, I'm really interested in talking to people who might have solutions for these. So the first one I mentioned already, and that's obtaining uncompressed files when it's safe for people to send. We have a lot of trouble getting these files. We have to talk people through how to download the WeTransfer app, talk people how to use Google Drive. A lot of people just don't know how to send full HD files easily, and we're often talking about people who don't necessarily have the best bandwidth to send, which clearly could be a problem if the video is very long, but if it's short, there should be a way. So that's actually a very common problem. People say, oh, it's on my phone, I can send it to you by WhatsApp. And that understanding that actually, if you can send it in a full file, we've got much better grounds to run it is really important to us. Reverse searching video keyframes when the quality is low or there is not distinctive imagery. This is a classic. We have seen so many videos showing missiles go off at night, and we never can run them because there's no geolocation to be done. And when you reverse search video keyframes, you get irrelevant results. It's very, very difficult to prove authenticity of missile shots at night unless you've got the original file, and even then you have to be confident that it's been obtained from a reliable source. So that's an extreme challenge for us, and it's frustrating because many missiles go off at night, and many times they're part of big stories. So it would be it's frustrating for us not to be able to use those, but we don't take the risk if we can't prove authenticity. Similarly, reverse searching image that's been filtered or cropped. I'm going to play this video here at the bottom. You might have seen this in August last year, obviously after the Beirut blast. I'll just turn the volume down because it's quite loud. So that's clip one. This is a second clip which was added to the same piece of video. Did you catch the missile? Someone added a missile. We know there was no missile, but you might be able to see it on this. If I get back to the frame, it was using very basic CGI. You see the flash in the sky? So what do we do here in terms of verifying it? Well, this video emerged very soon after the explosion. Actually, I think it was two days after it had happened. And our team had already been scrolling through all of the video that we could find showing the moment of the blast. So we'd actually seen this video before, and we could very quickly determine that it was from the local CNN camera that was there on the ground. Now, the CNN footage did not look like that, of course. The CNN footage was in full regular color. So this has been filtered using a negative filter to doctor it. And the thing that does is make it easier to add a fake missile, but secondly, make it harder for us to find the original, because finding filtered video using reverse image search doesn't bring in the results that you would expect. So that was quite an interesting one. And the second piece of video was a piece of UGC, which again, if we'd not seen that already, we might have struggled to find that in on the internet. So that's just an example of one thing that we'd like to see is things that are able to, I don't know, look through potentially filtered material to try to find matches. And similarly with duplicate videos, people have a way of cropping, of filming videos on screens to try to evade detection. And that's particularly true when we're fact-checking videos, because they know that they'll get marked up with a false information flag, and we see that all the time. And finally, I'd like to see an ability to search audio tracks, because very often the audio is more distinctive than the video, and sometimes we suspect that the audio has been added to a different piece of video, and it would be really excellent to be able to search the web, social platforms by the audio track alone. Okay, finally, onto AI. I'll just wrap up now, I'm going over. Deepfakes. So Jochen, you mentioned deepfakes. I spent all of 2019 talking about deepfakes and our research about deepfakes and what we were doing to kind of assess the veracity of it. I think it's now deeply ironic that now I'm thinking about how to prove things aren't deepfakes. So we knew that plausible deniability was going to be an issue caused by the idea of deepfakes. And we are absolutely seeing this. So the idea of a deepfake is very much now in the public perception. People understand that deepfake technology can create very realistic fakes. They've seen the Tom Cruise ones, they've seen other deepfakes which have really fooled them online. And they're now starting to ask whether real content is a deepfake. Let me just quickly play this clip. This is Donald Trump speaking on January the 8th. A user has added some commentary over the top.
I don't think we have sound.
You have sound playing. Okay, so the user is saying over the top of the video, it's not real. Look at his neck. This is not real. This is a deep fake. This is because at this point, Donald Trump was saying to his country, but Biden has just won the election. And many of Trump's supporters could not believe that Trump would actually accept that was the fact and was essentially backing down. And as such, there was deep suspicion about whether this video was real. And you'll see this was the headline that was published with one iteration of the video, which gained thousands and thousands of shares on Facebook, saying that it was a confirmed deepfake. We fact checked this, but actually it's very difficult proving that it's not a deepfake. So we're thinking about that now. In this case, there's only one recording. If you've got multiple recordings, you've got more of a chance to prove that there are different sources, different cameras. So we had to go back and look at previous examples of Donald Trump speaking in exactly this room. We looked at the neckline, we looked at other things which people were pointing as suspicious and showed that actually in every example of him speaking in this situation, those things were visible. Plus, we had digital experts come out and say that there was no evidence that this has been altered, and we would have expected to see someone come out and make at least a claim in terms of showing how it had been altered if that were the case. So I think that's one thing that's going to continue to rise. The Mexican elections at the beginning of this month had another example where a Mexican politician denied a video of him behaving inappropriately towards a woman and said it's a deep fake, and his team released a video that had a couple of frames removed and said, this is the real one, that other one's a deep fake. But actually it was unpicked by Milenio, the Mexican news outlet there, and shown that actually the version with 2 frames missing was the fake one. So demonstrating content provenance and authenticity is a challenge going forwards, and there is lots of work being done on this area. You might have heard Adobe mentioned in terms of this as a kind of a focus for them, and certainly their conversations to which Reuters has been listening very closely. And very finally, just to wrap up, machine learning and disinformation. So we know that as we grow our corpus of misinformation examples that carry associated fact checks, we're able to see just anecdotally evidence of patterns and things that we see repeating in those misinformation examples. So we think that the data set is actually of growing importance, and we're working very hard at Reuters to make sure that we're capturing that data set adequately, because we think there's a good use case for machine learning in future to detect things like linguistic patterns and other common features. So much misinformation is recirculates or is iterations of things that we've already seen, and we hope that by storing this data set and making good use of it, we'll be able to help with that in the future. So with that, I'll finish. Thanks for listening to me ramble on about that. I hope it's of interest.
Thanks very much, Hazel. That was so much information. So you've mentioned a number of challenges that are still out there. I hope people who are more on the techie side now in this workshop or conference will send you lots of answers. Maybe there are some already. We've been getting quite a few questions here. I've got a number lined up, so we have to limit it to a few. There was one question somebody was asking. I mean, there's so much misinformation, disinformation out there. The question is straightforward: what will be debunked and who decides?
That is the key question for us at the very beginning of the fact-checking process. It's a very good question to ask here. We have to make a framework, a very transparent framework for what we decide to check. We have to make sure we're looking in different areas, all sides of political divides. Clearly, we're a news organisation, so we try to fact-check things which are very current and linked to newsworthy topics, because that's something that we're most able to help debunk. We're looking for things that are either viral or have potential to go viral. And we're looking for things which are harmful, so things which could affect people's behaviour in a way that could be damaging to them, if they were to believe that. So whether it's making a decision about your health choices, or making a decision at the ballot box based on false information that could lead to a worse situation for you or your family down the line because of misinformation. So that's the kind of framework we have for assessment.
Okay, next question here by David Corney. He's asking, how concerned are you that you don't know exactly how the Facebook TPFC algorithm works? Are you concerned at all? And if so, how concerned?
I'm not too concerned. And the big reason is we absolutely decide independently what to fact check. So we're not relying on what the Facebook algorithm detects as potential misinformation. We are able to go out and make our own assessments, and we do actively do our own monitoring. So the Facebook tool is there as a useful thing to turn to, and particularly in terms of breaking news stories. We do definitely search for search terms connected to those stories. And if we felt that what we were seeing in that tool was not reflective of what's happening on Facebook at large, we would certainly make sure that we looked in other places. But yeah, it is a good point. The other thing which is in that tool is human feedback, and that's an important aspect to note. So although there is an algorithmic detection of potential misinformation, I think one of the key indicators is human feedback. So everybody who uses Facebook is able to report content as false news, and that's an indicator that goes to fact checkers. And I'd like to think that that can happen regardless of what your politics are or what your views on certain topics are. So that's one way of countering that too.
Okay. Another question concerns time and time pressure. Can you say something about the time pressure? I mean, you must be under a lot of time pressure, events unfolding. You mentioned Beirut. What's it like working under such pressure, and how much does that play a role for you and your team?
Yeah, time pressure is real, it's intense, and it's very much the case that Reuters clients expect content quickly. We've got a few ways of dealing with it. First of all is not to be bowed by that time pressure. It is more important that we get things right in the long term than to push out content when we're not ready and we're not fully confident that it's verified. We wouldn't take that risk. So in some cases, we have to accept that, that piece of content, that video that's gone super viral on Twitter and is hugely dramatic, while we'd love to put it on the wire, we can't find the source, we can't do the checks that we need to. How else can we tell the story? And sometimes that's a case of looking for other content, which we can find the source, even if it's less dramatic. So there are some difficult decisions to be made in terms of what to chase, because we have clearly got to use our resource carefully. And the other aspect for speed is making sure that if we know that events are likely to be happening like protests, etc., we've thought in advance about who in our organisation we can contact to make sure we're able to get answers from people on the ground or who are covering that patch.
Okay, now time is running, so the final question, and that comes from me. That's a privilege of being the moderator. Now, I always like to play Santa Claus or whatever, somebody who gives out presents. Now, if you had a wish, and you could choose a tool or something that would really make your working life easier, what would that be? What would you like to have, and what is really lacking? If you could just say, hey, this one service, tool, feature, whatever, that's what I'd really love to have, and that would make life so much better and easier. What would it be?
I think I mentioned it before. At the moment, it's the audio search, because we've definitely seen videos that have audio tracks spliced from somewhere else and put on, and it would save us hours if we could just reverse search that audio track. That would be amazing.
Well, if I can do a bit of PR, we are doing a work on another project called Digger, which I'm sure you know, where we work exactly on that, on the audio forensic, but that's a different workshop and a different story. But thank you very much so far, and I hope you can stay with us for a bit longer. So if you, the audience, if you have any more questions for Hazel, please feel free to include them in the chat, and Hazel, if you can, maybe you can send some replies. But great, and thank you very much for being here with us and delivering this talk and sharing your insights on what it's like working as a fact checker and verification expert in Reuters.